Hello and welcome to Mr. Stewart's History Revision Guide. Today we are looking at Paper 1, Question 4, which is your explain why your causation question is worth 12 marks. This video will explain how you would structure your answer to explain why question, show you a model 4-mark answer or one of the paragraphs that you would write. I will talk through in a step-by-step way how I wrote and how that 4 marks or paragraph was achieved, and then I will give you some practice questions at the end. Here is the example question that I'm going to use for this video. It is explain why civilians' experience of warfare changed in the modern period. You may use the following in your answer: conscription, nuclear weapons. You must also use information of your own. Now, for this question, I would recommend 18 to 20 minutes. Generally, sort of rule of thumb is you look at how many marks it is, you times that by 1.5. That's how long you should spend. So that would be 18 minutes. However, as this is quite a big mark question, you may have answered some of your 4-mark questions a bit quicker, and so you might be able to give yourself that extra couple of minutes to spend 20 minutes on this question. I would aim for a side and a quarter to a side and a half, ideally a side and a half I think would be good, of A4 for this question. Now, here is the question. You can see at the top I have put in purple the key bits of the question that I want you to think about whenever you answer a 12-mark question. So first bit, it says explain why. That's in purple. If a question starts with the word explain, that is giving you a lot of clues. That is telling you that you need to use PEE paragraphs, which is great because PEE paragraphs are pretty easy. This is the best way of making sure that you are explaining in your answer, and that is the key. You want to be explaining in your answer. The fact that it's worth 12 marks, that means that you should write 3 PE paragraphs. You should hopefully know that. 4-mark question, generally that's 1 paragraph. 8-mark question, generally that's 2 paragraphs. 12-mark question, generally that's 3 paragraphs. Okay, so 12-mark question, 3 PE paragraphs. Please do not write introductions, do not write conclusions. They aren't necessary, and you won't lose marks, but it's just a waste of your time. So please don't do it. Then you'll see that the question does give you 2 bullet points. It kind of helps you a little bit. I would always use that help. Use those bullet points. You know that the information provided by the exam board is going to be correct. It is at least going to be something that happened in the correct time period about the question that is being asked. You can use, it says you may use. You don't have to use this if you really don't know anything about them, or you would much rather use your own different things. You can do that. It is just riskier because they might not be correct. In this answer, you do need to provide factual information, so knowledge. You need to show off that you have a good understanding and knowledge of the topic. However, your focus must be on explaining why, and this is the single biggest mistake that keeps occurring in students' answers that I have to mark, is that all they want to do is just describe. They want to just tell me, this is everything I know about conscription. Oh yeah, brilliant. This is everything I know about nuclear weapons. And they're just spewing out this information rather than answering the question and explaining why these changes occurred. Okay, so it's not just about what they are, it's about explaining why the changes occurred. That's the key focus. The last bit in the question is also important. You can only get a maximum of 8 marks if you only talk about the examples. If you were to only talk about conscription and nuclear weapons, no matter how great your answer was, you are only getting 8 out of 12. So you must have 1 paragraph, at least 1 paragraph, from your own knowledge. Okay, here's the model paragraph. I'm going to let you just read it to begin with. I'm not going to go through it. I want you to think, where is the point? Where is the evidence? What part of this model paragraph? Where's the evidence? Where's the explanation? Okay, and roughly how much, what percentage is the point, what percentage is the evidence, what percentage is the explanation. Okay, hopefully you worked out that this is the point, this is the evidence, and this is the explanation, and you saw that the explanation was roughly about half of the paragraph, and that's really what you should aim for. The focus of the question is to be explaining, so not describing. So you want to be explaining in your explanation rather than describing in your evidence. Too often answers have loads of evidence and then maybe a sentence at the end that explains. That is not going to get a lot of marks because it is not focusing on explaining. So I've shown you a model paragraph, I've shown you what one looks like, but that's great, that's brilliant, but how do you replicate this? Okay, now you can remember that paragraph that I've written, but if you get a different question, you still don't know what the process is you need to go through to get a model paragraph like that. So what I do is I have flashcards. You may have mind maps, you may have other tables, something like that, that you have used for your revision. I use flashcards, and I'm going to show you the flashcard that I created and show you how I would use that to get to the point where I've got my model paragraph that I just showed you. Okay, here is the flashcard that I have for the experience of civilians in the modern period. I'm not going to go through it, but you can look at that. I've separated it in 3 sections. There it is. So if you want, you can just pause and read through. You can do that now if you wish. Okay, what I've done here is I've highlighted the bits of information from the flashcard that I'm going to use in my answer. So don't have to know everything. It's not everything in my flashcard, it's just little bits of information that I can talk about. Okay, so using the flashcard, as you saw in the previous slide, I highlighted information on the 3 different paragraphs I want to talk about. The bits in blue, they were on conscription. They were the bits that I used for my model paragraph. The bits in red, they were the information I had on nuclear weapons. And what I then did is I looked at my flashcard and I thought, well, what do I have a lot of information? What could be my 3rd point from my own knowledge? I had a decent amount of information about the changing role of women. So that was what I decided my 3rd paragraph from my own knowledge would be about. When I got to the point that I thought, okay, this is the 3 things I'm going to be talking about in my answer, I needed to think, okay, I need to now explain why they changed. Remember, it's not just good enough to describe information, you must explain why. Here is my big tip. When you're trying to think, well, why is it that these changes occurred? What caused these changes to happen? Think of these 6 factors that I'm about to talk to you about. Think, how has science, technology, communication, governments, individuals, or attitudes in society, how have they caused, or how could any of those explain why conscription or nuclear weapons or the role of women had changed civilians' experience of warfare? And this is the thing you should do for every 12-mark question. Once you've got your bullet points, you've thought of something else, think to yourself, what is it? What has caused this to change? Is it a specific individual? Is it a new bit of technology? Is it that people now think differently in society? And use those thoughts, use these guidance, these factors to explain why. And you can do it for pretty much most questions. In this question, conscription, the reason why conscription was put in place was because governments were enforcing it on civilians in emergencies, total war, World War I, World War II. With nuclear weapons, the way that changed the civilians' experience of warfare, this is clearly a new science, new technology to create the nuclear weapons, so there was a change there. Now civilians, after they know about nuclear weapons, they're living in fear that there could be nuclear holocaust. But not only that, but you see emerging in the sort of 1980s onwards, attitudes in society developing. So again, civilians' the experience of warfare is changing, as there's now, because of the fear and the devastating power of nuclear weapons, there's this much more anti-war sentiment. And if you were to compare how people feel about war today compared to how they feel about war at the beginning of the 20th century, it's very, very different. War was celebrated. World War One, Britain, Germany, all the people were very happy. Yes, excellent, we're going to war. Now we don't get that because attitudes in society have changed. Third paragraph, the role of women. This is clearly attitudes in society. That's why it's changed. In the First World War, it would be unthinkable that women would be fighting in the army. Women didn't even have the vote at the beginning of the First World War. For them to be fighting the army would be crazy for people to think that in World War One. Whereas now, it's completely normal. So the only reason why women's experience of warfare has changed in the modern period is because attitude towards women has changed in that period. Okay. I'm going to go through my model paragraph by the point, the evidence and explanation, showing examples and sort of explaining how I got to my answer. So the point, very simple, the beginning of each paragraph, you should just describe in general what the change was and use the question as your sentence starter. So you can see here I've done one reason why civilians' experience of warfare changed in the modern period, using the question as my sentence starter, is due to the huge demands placed on recruiting soldiers for the two world wars, which led to governments, my factor, recruiting civilians via conscription, the bullet point in the question. Next, with your evidence, what you want to do is provide specific detail, and I use this word SPEND, which is statistics, places, events, names, dates. That is what, if you're thinking, well, my teacher's saying what specific, you need to use more specific detail, what does that mean? That means statistics, places, events, names, dates. So when you're doing your evidence bit, the temptation is to just write loads of, because you think, oh, I've got lots and lots of evidence. But remember, the focus is on explaining, not describing. So try to keep your evidence bit relatively brief. In my example, I wrote, in the First World War, civilians were conscripted from 1916. So I've used an event and a date there. In the Second World War, that's an event. The government, linking back to my factor, decided to introduce conscription, linking to the bullet point, straight away in October 1939. Date. After the Second World War, event, a limited form of conscription existed titled National Service. That's a name, which lasted until 1960. A date. So lots of SPEND information, but it's really not that long. Finally, your explanation. This should be about half of your paragraph answer. And here you should be explaining the role that one or maybe more of the 6 factors had in changing civilians' experience of warfare. So in my answer, I've said this shows the clear role governments were having on civilian lives in the modern period. So I'm clearly stating governments as my factor. Governments played a key role in changing civilians' lives as they decided if recruitment was voluntary or mandatory, i.e. conscription. However, governments only enforced conscription on civilians in times of national emergency when they needed a significant proportion of the population to fight in the armed services, like that of the two world wars. So there you go, clearly using the factor to explain why the change took place. Okay, I hope you found that useful. Please do go back through the video and look at the different parts to sort of look at what I've done and how I've used my flashcard and how I've structured my answer. Here are a couple of example practice questions that you can try out. Again, I would advise you to write about 1¼ to 1½ pages minimum and do it in time conditions and spend about 18 to 20 minutes answering it. Thank you very much.